My name's Gemma Finlayson. I'm a director in the employment team at Squire Patton Boggs in the Leeds office. Just to give a bit of background, I am advise companies of different sizes, so from the smaller businesses to the large international PLCs on all range of employment law matters, contentious and non-contentious. And as well as advising the businesses, I work very closely with our corporate team on advising management when private equity companies are investing in their business, and also advising private equity businesses, private equity houses when they are investing in companies. So I kind of see it from all angles, from the smaller businesses as they're expanding and advising them, but also from that perspective of, you know, when investors are coming in and what they're looking for and where things may have gone wrong over that kind of expansion program. So I'm going to, when I do this session, I'll talk about it from both angles, really. So I'm going to talk about the importance of employment contracts, policies and procedures, effective management and training, employee engagement, benefits and well-being, and generally the importance of having somebody in HR working with the business. Now, as businesses expand, HR plays a critical role in the success of the company, from that hiring and training of new and current employees to keeping staff happy, and as well as dealing with the inevitable fallouts that might arise during that expansion program. And it's really the people that work with you are the key to the business and at the heart of it. So, you know, a typical employment lawyer have to start with contracts. So just in terms of contracts, you're likely to already have those in place. They are the fundamentals, and that's why I want to just mention them very briefly. They set out the foundations, they set out the standards, expectations and boundaries for employees, and both from employee and employer perspective. And there's various legal requirements in terms of what they need to cover. So, you know, obviously they need to be in place for all employees, along with a staff handbook. And as you're expanding, you know, potentially you don't need a staff handbook when you've got, you know, just a few employees, but as expansion, as you do expand, then that becomes more important to kind of set out those standards and expectations. But what I wanted just to talk about really was about key employees. So those employees that have grown with the business or have been recruited in senior roles, and making sure that they have the contractual provisions that are sufficient to protect the business, and looking at it from both perspectives, both from the individual but also from the company. Are the provisions in place sufficient to protect the business, particularly if things do go wrong, or just if those key individuals find other roles that they want to go and join? You know, you want to make sure that the business is protected. So I just want to briefly touch on notice periods. It's something that I see, particularly when I'm acting for private equity houses, that the notice periods in place for key employees just aren't at the level that they would be expecting. And then you have to have that negotiation, those discussions with those key individuals to try and change those notice periods. So getting it right in the first instance, either on recruitment or when they've kind of been promoted within their roles. You know, 1 month notice period for someone that is key, that's fundamental to the business, is probably not going to be sufficient if they obviously choose to resign or leave, to be able to hand over all that knowledge that they have of the business, particularly if they've been involved from the outset. They've built up a lot of knowledge, and you want to be able to have sufficient time to get that knowledge from them, to hand it over to somebody else, to get either recruit someone new into their role or promote somebody into their role. So notice periods are important. Restricted covenants, again, become more important for key individuals. You don't want them to be able to go off and solicit other employees, customers, clients, suppliers, try not to deal with those customers, suppliers, to the extent that it's going to have a damaging impact on the business. You're also potentially looking at non-compete restrictions, particularly obviously startups, that you don't want them to go and set up another business that's in competition. So having a look at whether you've got those restrictions in place or putting them in place. It's worth bearing in mind that there is a consultation programme underway in relation to restrictive covenants, and trying to restrict the enforceability of non-compete restrictions, potentially making them so that they are not enforceable at all, which I don't think will end up being the case. I think we're going to end up in a situation where businesses are going to have to pay for non-compete restrictions, which I think for smaller businesses that are expanding, I think that is going to be a tricky situation to be in, because potentially you end up in the situation where you can't afford to enforce those restricted covenants. But we'll see where we get to with that. The other key contractual provisions to think about: confidentiality and IP, particularly those individuals that are creating, developing IP, trademarks, know-how, making sure that IP remains belonging to the business, to the company, not to the individuals. Policies and procedures, again, when you first set up, you don't necessarily need to have these formal policies and procedures in place. You can generally deal with things on an informal basis. Everyone's talking to each other fairly regularly, but as expansion programs continue and things grow, there are more and more employees, then it's much harder to keep on top of everybody and to continue with that informal process. So it becomes more important to have these formal policies and procedures in place. I won't really talk about recruitment, because obviously Tracy is going to be talking about that, but it is a huge investment, so it's really important to plan and prepare for the long term. This is an area where I see 6 months down the line, smaller businesses have recruited somebody. 6 months later, they realise, actually, we just didn't get the job description right, so we've ended up with the wrong person in the wrong role. And so you end up having to look at recruitment again, and also potentially dismissing somebody fairly new in the role, which nobody really wants to be in that situation. So that's all I'm going to say about recruitment, because I'll let Tracy talk about it. Equal opportunities. I'll talk about this in a context of ESG, so environmental, social and corporate governance issues, which are really key issues for investors. So if your longer game is to get investment, then you need to be making sure as part of your expansion program you're considering those types of issues. And key ESG HR issues are concerned for how a company engages with its workforce. There is a public expectation for employers to be doing the right thing. There's future employees' expectation that businesses will be doing the right thing, and part of that is making sure there's equal opportunities, diversity and inclusion within businesses. So it's important to kind of get those policies, the equal opportunity policies, in place, not just having that policy, but living the values of that policy and making sure employees understand it, and understand that as a business you want to have gender parity in terms of pay, promotion, same for ethnicity, age, disability, and making sure that you're supporting people within the business. Family friendly rights, policies, procedures, again, potentially become more important as you expand, and putting those in place, and good for helping to retain employees when they obviously potentially need to rely on those policies. Disciplinary and grievances. When you're a smaller business, you potentially get away with just following the ACAS guidance, but again, as you expand, you want to be able to have formal policies in place to make sure that people are being treated consistently if there are the inevitable fallouts that might arise. So it's important to have those policies in place to be able to follow those when necessary. And that's the same for performance management, sickness management. Again, when there's a few employees, you can generally, well, I would say, have those performance discussions down at the pub, but can't have that at the minute. So probably over a Zoom call. Whereas as businesses expand, there's not that hands-on, everybody talking to each other. You're reliant on other people to manage others within the business, and you want to make sure that people know what's expected of them, know that they're being treated fairly and consistently. So having those policies and procedures in place will help with that. I've touched on health and safety. Obviously, it's becoming, always been an issue, but with the pandemic, we need to make sure you have COVID secure workplaces when you are back in the offices. That's going to be fundamental to employees when they return. Next point is effective management and training. This is we see obviously as businesses expand, there will be internal promotions, or you hope there'll be internal promotions. You want to be keeping people that started with the business, because they have that knowledge, they have that know-how, and promoting them into the right areas could work for the business and work for them. The issue that you might have is that they might not be right for people for management responsibilities or leadership. So it's trying to look at, have they got the skills to go into those roles? Can you provide them with formal training to support them in those roles, or are they ultimately just not right for a managerial or leadership role, and they're best kind of in the techie area or specific areas that they ultimately were brought in for? But you know, they could develop into those areas. It's providing them with the skills, the support to do that. And next point is about communication and vision within teams, making sure that employees are fully aware of, have their defined roles, responsibilities, and know how they're going to contribute to the business. Let them do that. They've been brought in for a reason, and let them use those skills to work with the business and help with any expansion programs, trying not to micromanage them and give them their autonomy. If people have that autonomy, obviously with the appropriate support, they will flourish, and that's obviously going to be key to the business's success. In terms of training, this is kind of an ongoing issue. You potentially got on board training that you want to get right when people start, and having some kind of program in place so that they know exactly how the business works, and that formal training programs for making sure, like I said, the leadership training or management training, but more specific kind of customer service training, if that's the area that they're in. And then the less formal, so like having a mentor or a buddy, whether that's within the business or looking externally, using contacts that you know to kind of buddy up with either new recruits or people within the business, just to give that someone else an external bit of support that's not their manager. It just helps people to develop. And then training in tips of equal opportunities, diversity and inclusion, making sure that everybody understands that having a diverse team with different perspectives is great for a business and gives a better company culture. Employee engagement, benefits and well-being, a big topic here, so I'll just touch on a few of the points. As expansion programs progress, it becomes more and more difficult to really understand how employees are feeling, how motivated they are, what the issues are. And so it's important to keep trying to get in different ways, keeping communication with all your employees. You know, you're not going to be able to, the founders aren't going to be able to have that one-to-one communication that they potentially previously had. So it's important to look at ways to keep communication in place, keep getting that feedback and using that feedback to make sure that you're responding to what the issues are within the business. Flexible working, everyone is looking for that work-life balance. If you're wanting to attract talent, then that's something that they'll be looking for. So making sure that you're showing that you can support that, and you're looking at it. Obviously the pandemic has resulted in a lot of home working, and there'll be a future of home working mixing in with being in the office. So just looking at what it is that you can do to accommodate that. Additional benefits, perks. As a small business, potentially you don't have the budget there to be able to provide sort of the more significant, the more costly benefits, like the medical plans, dental plans, but you can provide, as you're expanding, some of the more, say sometimes more valued by the individuals, having that extra day off for your birthday, food and drink vouchers. I've had an example of a fairly small business, but again expanding, and they've been working really, really hard everyone has acknowledged they've been working really hard over the last couple of months, and to show that value, show that the management kind of acknowledge that everyone has been working hard. They've just given them vouchers for a takeaway at the weekends, and it's just small things like that that just show that employees are valued, and you don't realize sometimes how much those small things are going to be have on employees. Mental health, pre the pandemic, this was obviously a big issue, and it's going to be an even bigger issue with when people start coming back into the office. So it's really, really important that managers are given the tools to deal with kind of stress, both of themselves and also their teams, and dealing with it at an early stage, and having those kind of support mechanisms in place. It might be that you look at having a mental health champion who has that training and support to understand really what to be looking out for, and giving employees a point of contact that, again, that's not their manager, that they might not feel comfortable talking to, so they those champions can point them in the right direction and get support if and when it's needed. So I think mental health is a big issue, and it's something we just need to be really aware of. So I was just seeing this chat and I hadn't noticed that. Then I'll just minimize the chat for a minute. I'm just going to talk about the importance of, I've obviously been talking about HR essential considerations, but the importance of actually having somebody in HR within the business. Now that might be, this is obviously going to depend on resources. So it might be somebody that's been with the business who takes on that HR responsibilities, and it's not necessarily their background, and obviously giving them the training and the skills to be able to do that role. It might be that you can outsource the HR support. There are HR directors out there that you can bring in on a consultancy basis who can give you that overall strategy, that guidance that you may need. But ultimately you do need, as you're expanding, that HR support there to get those policies, procedures, contracts, all of that stuff correct. But not just that. Employment law is a never changing area. It keeps me in a job, so I can't complain, but it is something that's really difficult for businesses to keep on top of. There's always going to be changes to things like national minimum wage, and there's always going to be legislation that changes. But then there's case law that, I never thought that holiday pay could become a really controversial topic that has lots and lots of case law on it, and it's really difficult to get to really understand what's happening with it. But what should be potentially basic areas can end up becoming big issues for businesses, and it's fine when you've got 5-10 employees, but the more employees you have, the more likely it is that these become bigger issues. And so you need to make sure that you have somebody who can keep on top of that and advise the business accordingly. Compliance with reporting obligations, again, as a smaller business, you're less likely to have those reporting obligations, but as you expand, then those will come into play. Gender pay gap reporting is obviously one of the ones that springs to mind. That applies generally if you've got more than 250 employees, but there's consultation underway to reducing that down for if there are 100 plus employees. So these become more and more relevant, and having somebody in HR keeping an eye on these things will obviously help the business as and when it expands. And I've talked about having those policies and procedures in place, the benefits of having those in place and having HR there to support means that people are more likely to be treated consistently and fairly, and that in turn gives rise to less likely for challenge, people saying they're being treated unfairly, treated in a discriminatory way. So having that HR person or support there will help to ensure that people are treated consistently and help hopefully avoid those contentious issues arising, which ultimately take up a lot of management time, which you don't really want your management to be sort of dealing with those issues. You want to be focusing on the business and that expansion.